All right. All right, let's get started here. This is the Continuum of War, Part 2. And looks like we have a lot of nullsec haters because there's some seats available here, but okay. It's all right. Won't take it personally. All right, I am Materall, and or you can say it the Icelandic way, which is Materall. I am the creator of Talking in Stations. We've now recorded 160 episodes. And I was looking at the stats. We've done about 4,000 listening hours of EVE Online for about the last 2.5 years, 3 years. We also have talkingstations.com, which you can visit for older episodes. And our Discord is up to 1,600 players that sit there and actually talk to each other and exchange ideas, which is pretty cool. I also did, before that, the EM24 podcast. Anybody listen to that? I did. I used to go and listen to them because they were actually produced. But besides that, I was a writer. I wrote about 150 articles for EN24, TMC, INN. Also was editor for them. And some of the artwork you see up here is mine from an article called Purgatory. Masks of Purgatory is written by Matani, but he and I conceptualized the article together. And so, yeah, podcaster, editor, writer, artist, but I'm best known for my in-game stuff. And this is me and my special fake Fortizar detection service. And that means you jump your jump freighter into Fortizar and not get let in, and you're summarily executed and blown up with the added advantage of being a trusted ransom payer. I paid $5 billion to try to save it. And then also certified module hauler. And also drifter bait at the end of all that. One of the funniest things about that, I think I've told this story before, but I had actually lost a really expensive module that was for my Titan, and I was really disappointed for a few weeks. But when I got killed, I found it in the kill mail, so I actually was really happy with the guys that killed me because it allowed me not to have lost that. And that's one of those small little miracles of perspective that you get from playing EVE Online. So last year was the Continuum of War, and that was done through the eyes of a character named Apollo that was inside of my corporation, and at the end there was this big reveal that the character I was describing was actually, and this is a spoiler, was actually me too, because I also play Materall. And so this character, though, we're going to pick up where we left off, because the first few years were all about playing the game and experiencing the things that were being told to you while you're in it. But this is about experiencing the game from behind the scenes. So we'll get started. This is Continuum of War, and it goes on the philosophy that war is eternal. Their civilizations are colliding constantly. They don't actually stop. But what you see every once in a while is the flare-up of conflict, and that's what we call a war or a campaign, that kind of stuff. So we'll go over the constants of war, how we can identify wars, and then we'll talk about the events themselves as we go. So up here you see that we have fleet commanders, and if you think of fleet commanders, they are the like embers. They are the little pieces of flame that spark the next campaign. And the campaign would be the spark that starts the fire. And the fire would actually be the war that you see in that kind of analogy. And so diplomats and CEOs and that kind of stuff, the diplomats would be kind of like the firewood arrangers. They're the ones that kind of arrange how the next war is going to happen. For the fleet commanders to come in and burn everything up. And then the CEOs are kind of like the funders. They're the ones that figure out how to fund the wars. And then the passion that players have across the board, that's all fuel for the gas. So if you think about war in those terms, those are kind of how you can identify it when it happens. But normally these people are in conflict constantly, and that's the continuum. So it was hard to conceptualize, so I just did a brain dump with a little sketch, and I started to figure out, like, what happened these last 2.5 years, right? Since, and I'll say it this way for now, Casino War and World War B, what's happened since then? Because that seemed to be a seminal moment in EVE Online. Because it's really hard to kind of figure this stuff out, because people work together and then they fight each other constantly. So Test and Goons are together, and then they're fighting, and then they're together again. And it's hard to figure out like what side they're on, but it depends on what their interests are at the time. You also have Triumvirate, was really a part of DRF, but they kind of broke off and fought their own guys. You have Horde fighting GOTG right now. They were allies for a long time. And in the east, you have XIX and Solar constantly fighting each other in nullsec. But they actually got together and formed a DRF. So it changes, and it depends on the people because they move around, and corporations move around, and the passions follow those people and corporations. All right, so these are the broad strokes. We'll go through this really quick. 2016 these are the major themes that we're going to hit. 2016 was basically the World War B casino war. Then after that is the 2017 will be about the drones. These are very broad sweeps, and these things all intermingle. And then in 2018, we'll talk about the Great War of the Titans. And that's not, I'm just calling it that for now. You can choose your own name for it. In fact, we'll talk about picking names in just a minute. But I also want to talk about, when we talk about the World War B casino war, we're going to talk about a little bit the prologue that comes up to it, the invasion of Deklein, and the fallout, the tribute Annex, where NC boots out CO2, and you have the NWO, which is New World Order. We'll talk about that a little bit. 2017, we'll go into the drone regions and talk about how the Southern empires settle around that time. We're talking about Imperium in Delve, Legacy in Catch, and also Phoenix Federation in Immensea in that area. And Judgment Day is a part of some of the stuff that happens there because all that gets into major conflict that ends up destroying the drones, which is it's a very big event. And on the 2018, we have this gigantic war that really dwarfs anything that's come before it, and it happens in the summer, which is really wild. And that is it starts with the sack of Providence and the Great War of the Titans, and there's a northern front and there's a southern front. And then the most recent thing that's happened, it's kind of fallout from that war, is a northern schism that we'll talk about. Yeah, some of you might be happy about that, but... So a long time ago, leading up to this, I talked to Matani about this, and we were talking about civilizations and stuff like that. And about 2006, there was a real big split between the people who had been playing this game for a while and these newcomers that were a goon swarm. And that collision wasn't just a few battles or a lot of passion that was left over. It was kind of a separation between us and them that has stuck with us this entire time. So for the West, the big division is between Goon Swarm and whoever they ally with, and let's say remnants of Bob and whoever they ally with, and that's for the West. For the East, it's different. It's Solar and XIX. Excuse me, they have the division. Can I get some water up here somewhere? It may not get any better, so I better have some water. Okay. So one of the major battles that we know about is the Battle of BTAC-R, where we had like 2,600 people in system and about 7,500 people that were involved. Thank you, Carneros. Appreciate it. And at the time, that was colossal. We've been working up to it, but just one second. Wow. Las Vegas has a lot of smokers. And that battle was kind of like the gigantic set piece for what had preceded it for years. And that also showed us that we needed to fix the game. Or it showed CCP that you couldn't have these kinds of giant set pieces with people able to travel all over the galaxy. So that signaled a few things, really. It signaled that the goons have actually caught up to the Bob guys that were trying to stay in bigger and stronger ships as compared to having more members. But the goons were actually catching up with their capital fleet and becoming something that was significantly powerful. It also showed CCP they needed to fix the game a bit. So what happened in the following years, is 2014-15, is that the game was trying to fix, the CCP was trying to fix the game, and you had Phoebe jump nerfs, you had new sovereignty. And these things were helping out occupancy sov. And occupancy solve was something that Goonswarm would really benefit from, but not necessarily the people like PL or NC, because they were more based on moving around to attack people, not build an empire. And so the next thing that was going to drop in 2016 was was citadels. Citadels were going to drop. That was going to be possibly another advantage. So part of the thinking at the time was, if we don't act now, we'll never get a chance. There was also some fuel. You had NCPL that wanted revenge for BTAC-R. They got beat up pretty good, and they wanted to degrade their enemies. You had TESS that wanted some revenge for Fountain War, and you had Snuff and Shadow Cartel that recently had been extorted in the Viceroy program, so they wanted some revenge as well. So let's talk about these titles. What do you guys think this one is called? Just say it out loud, and we'll see where we're at. No, well, probably Casino War Consensus, but the thing about the title is that the title is part of the war. That's why we can't name it. If you think about it, one of the things they were trying to do in this war was divide and conquer, which we try to do in every war. And part of that was to say, this war is not about allies, it's about bees, Goonswarm. So from the Imperium perspective, they're trying to hold it together, and if you title the war in a way that is separating the allies from the core members, you're actually psychologically warfaring, if that's a word, or engineering their breakup. And it actually worked when you think about it, because you have CO2 that broke off. We'll get into that in just a second. But the Casino War also has problems if you want to think of it as a war about revenge and a war about momentum and stuff like that. And the casinos really don't have that big a role in it. They were really just the money. They weren't the motivation. So a lot of people will say the money got it started, but the motivation kept it going. And if you talk about a political, this third one here, the War of Solveless Aggression, it was Matani's strike at CCP to say, this war empowers people that don't want your SOV. Your game's broken. That was where he was coming from. I called it mercenary wars because I thought they were mostly mercenaries. We'll talk about that in just a second. But funny enough, I was running INN at the time, and I said, look, there's too many names for it, guys. We got to settle on one. Mistake number one. And I said, well, we'll just call it the Mercenary Wars, and I made that up. That was the only time Matania said, I'm overruling you. And he said, it's going to be War of Solveless Aggression. And then I said, that's terrible. And Sion came in and said, okay, everybody call it whatever you want, and that was the end of that. Okay, so the Imperium is attacked from different sides. Why would they do that? They always go after, and this is for all wars, you go after the weakest links, and you try to break them off, and you reduce and reduce and reduce till you get to the core members that are the strongest, and then you have a better chance of defeating them. So they're attacked on 3 different sides. Hordes down there at the bottom, NCPL are probably in tribute, and up at the top you have everybody, like even these guys called drone walkers, which were a new little group. So they're getting attacked on all sides. The reaction to that is to consolidate as quickly as possible to defend yourselves, get into the same system as quickly as possible. That's what the Imperium tried to do, but they were too slow. So you have groups that were trying to get to them getting cut off and killed, like FCONs trying to get there, too late. CO2 is convinced it's not in their best interest to stick around, and they decide that that's true. And so they break off. And of all these, to get an idea of how heavy this war was and how much of an impact it had, you had 40 alliances coming at the Imperium. 28 of those alliances were paid. Tissue was one of the early groups in. They were paid $1.2 trillion before the war was over. Does anybody want to guess how much World War B cost? Or the Casino War? No? I'll just tell you this, it's in trillions. It comes to 14 trillion ISK of payments made to mercenaries to attack the Imperium. And it worked. So I wrote an article about this called the inside the I-1 versus SMA war is one of the seeds of the war. And it's a really good article because I think it really goes deep into the psychology of what's going on before it goes into this. So the thing about it is that the Imperium was defeated. They were evicted. I'll put it that way because that's probably the fairer way to say. They were defeated, evicted, and they kind of lingered in the area, and they were trying to win Sov back. And then I think, I'm probably the only guy that thinks this, but then Darkness, who had taken over Deklein, put down the first keep star in nullsec, and that signaled the end, I think, of that conflict. And because right after that, like 2 days after that, the Mittani announced they were all going to go south. And they were going to lily pad through these new structures all the way down to a place that they were choosing. They hadn't actually told people where it was going to be, but most people guessed it was going to be Delve, because that was just a hodgepodge of a lot of little alliances. They could easily go down there and sweep them out. But what's interesting is that whole conflict sets up the next 2 years of war, because there's this active revenge they want for getting kicked out. They look at CO2 as traitors, and they want to harm them. They want to destroy them. They look at PL, friends of theirs in the past, and they want to destroy them too now, because they realize through spies that PL had a lot to do with the organization of this war, the coordination, and all that. So that is what sets up, so that happens in the spring, right? Talking in Stations is just starting out. We're looking at the map and we're saying, hey, there's all these troop movements, and we watched all this happen, talking about it, getting people from other sides. We had an actual debrief with the FCs that participated to say what actually happened. Did we have this comprehensive view of what happened? And it was really too big, and we were too close to it to really analyze the significance of it. But we tried to. So that's when all this is happening at the same time that Talking in Stations is starting to understand how to perform a show. And so what you have is what happens after that, it settles, the summer settles everybody, and you have northern powers that are now like renting space out. Remember, Lenny, who was the secret broker of all these alliances, is still around at this time. I believe he's rented space to Darkness, who's now Guardians of the Galaxy Coalition. You have sub-coalitions starting to form after a while. And if anybody knows PvPers, they want to fight because if they don't, they're like sharks. They have to keep swimming. If they're not swimming, they're going to suffocate. So they need to fight each other, and sub-coalitions start to form in the north. And that's where you see CO2 forming with Test, and you see NC forming with, well, PL Horde and MC. So at a certain point, CO2, because they're very much brawlers and they want to fight all the time, start to make attacks on MC, and it's discovered that they want to reset everybody, because if anybody knew Gigex doesn't like to have too many blues. He likes to keep everybody available as targets. So that leaks out, and at that point, NC. needs a war too, so they start attacking CO2, and CO2 does a very good job of holding them off for a while, but PL gets involved, and eventually the momentum kicks Test and CO2 out. One of the major battles there was SH1, and that was, I believe, the jump destroyers or command ships were new. And one of the things amazing about that fight is they deployed, I think it was 10 or 20 Titans, and they were able to get the majority of them out. Normally, like BTAC-R, you could never do that. But because it was new technology, they were able to extract from that fight. But that did signal the end of the war. Momentum was too strong against CO2. This war ended up with the first destruction of a keep star that was actually defended. That's MTEC-O. And that is the biggest war on record up to this point. That was 5,300 in one system. And actually, incidentally, this is what's great about Eve Vegas. That was planned here at Eve Vegas. I think it was 2015. I was actually videotaping Lady Scarlet and Celine talk about how it would get activity up if they attacked that keep star. So that was right here in the hotel next door. So the southern entities go back and settle. Again, the timeline's going to be a little screwy here. Goonswarm and Imperium has already gone to Delve. They're very slowly clearing it out, very cautiously clearing it out. Luckily, nobody has chased them. So even though they're wounded, they're not actually having to worry about the constant onslaught of defending themselves. Phoenix is also FCON, Once they were not able to regroup, they broke off from the Imperium, came down and formed Phoenix Alliance. And now you have Legacy forming, and that is CO2 and Test coming down from the north. So Legacy's coming down, and they're saying, who should we kick out? So this is kind of funny, but Phoenix and Vanguard say, hey, we'll help you get space, but you got to kick out the guys next to us, not us. And so they all attack Catch, which is where Stain is. And Stain's an ally of Goonswarm, but Goonswarm Imperium is actually kind of weak at this point. They're now nursing themselves back to health. So it's a big risk for them to deploy and help out with a full deployment and everything, Stain. But they do anyway. But Stain itself isn't able to support itself, so Goonswarm, with a few mishaps, decides it's not worth it, and they back up, and they don't help. Stain gets thrown out right away. This was supposed to be a big winter war. It wasn't. It was only a few weeks. And now you have Test and CO2 take up space, and this is good because Test now realizes they need to become a super capital power in order to get anywhere. So their whole plan is to find a home and to build super capitals in order to hold off NC and PL and the people that had thrown them out of the north. Funny enough, CO2 makes themselves at home too, because they just lost their Keep Star, MTAC-O. So they actually put down a new Keep Star in 68 FT. We'll come back to that one on Judgment Day. So the end of drones, it's a very complex and really interesting story, and I encourage you guys to look into it, or maybe we'll have to do that and write something about it, because it's really its own hour-long presentation. And I'll see if I can do a good job without destroying it, but I make no promises. The DRF had actually come together after being enemies for a while. You have XIX, which are kind of like farmer Russians. I hope that's not derogatory. And you have Solar Fleet, which are kind of like warrior Russians. And they don't like each other from way back in Curse Alliance when they were together. And they actually start to come together over some negotiations. Their animosity is kind of like, they don't like each other, but they end up working together anyway, and they start to form with other groups something called the DRF, Drone Region Federation. And they start to dominate all of the east of the map. They pacify it for rentership so they can make money off people who want space without the trouble of having to raise a military to defend themselves. And that's what they end up doing. For the next 2 years, it's relatively pacified. But as anything, there's atrophy if there's not movement. So you have groups that start to break off. One of the groups that breaks off is Triumvirate. Triumvirate needs to fight things, so they say they will. They were kind of friendly with the DRF, but they're going to break off just to kind of farm Phoenix and they're actually around before even the World War B thing happens, or Casino War. And you have also, interestingly enough, you have Volta that breaks off from Tri. So these are, breaking off of breaking off. And both these groups will come back to haunt the DRF later on. So Triumvirate has to find some kind of income source eventually, because the moon mining changes are going to make it so groups like them have a hard time surviving. They're used to capturing single point areas like a moon, hogging up all the resources and selling that for income that they can pay their military with. That lifestyle is going away because the moons themselves now need to be mined by multiple people. That is not an easy thing to do if there's only 20 guys that want to fight all the time. So what they have to do is find somebody else to do that. They have to rent out territory. But they don't want a big swath of territory. They just need a small one. And only to rent out. They don't actually want to occupy it because they have no use for it. So they start to decide they want Innsmother, Immensea, Detroit, those areas that are occupied by Phoenix Alliance. And Phoenix is not known as warriors necessarily. They have huge fleet numbers, but they're not known for expertise in fighting. But they do show up. And so they want to go through Phoenix Alliance first, and then they'll take on Solar second, and they'll take over that territory. They can't run it all, so they actually very secretly start working with Winter Alliance, and that is Fraternity. These are Chinese players that have come from the Chinese, well, they come from everywhere, but the Chinese server, as that one has been dominated by one group. And the group that's coming over that forms Fraternity is the group that lost the Serenity server. So if they're coming here, they need to hit. They are very hungry to fight, but they come in, and this is something that's very interesting. They play for a while, and there's just not enough of them to have a threshold of action, so they kind of exit the game. So Wind Spirit, one of their leaders, decides that he's going to try to get them to get to a certain threshold so they can actually participate in the game and not just leak out of Tranquility server. So they are coming up, and they are absorbing all the territory that's being annexed by Triumvirate. And that's where that war kind of gets going. So Phoenix is not strong enough to defend against Triumvirate and Winter Coalition, so they decide they need to merge up with a bigger power, and their big brother to the east is going to be DRF. And so they form a super coalition of over 48 members, 48 alliances, and that whole thing is called Drone Phoenix Federation or something. It's a conglomeration of both names. And so they start fighting Triumvirate in the south, and they actually start winning. Obviously, there's a lot more of them now. But what happens is, as they're about to win, Guardians of the Galaxies attacks their northern frontier. And so they have to split up. And DRF, Drone Control Unit, and Manfred Sidious, former PLFC, in a very valiant fight, is like Stalingrad. They go up north, and they defend against this keep star that's been planted in their northern territory. And it was a huge battle. It was one of the most interesting battles of the last 2 years. And they actually managed to destroy this keep star that was anchoring, and it was supported by super capitals and titans. Well, GOTG is able to extract, so their titans aren't lost, but they put a lot at risk. And DCU and northern DRF people have survived that one battle, but now they're getting raided on two fronts. So they're fighting in the south. Solar's continuing the fight against Triumvirate and Winter, and they're holding them off. Unbelievably holding them off. They fought like lions, is what I hear. And in the north, they're trying to get the GOTG or Darkness or Sword Dragon to stop warring them, because they're coming and blowing up manufacturing areas, Sotios and stuff like that. So they pay them $1 trillion to go away, and also to support them in that war. But so that was the number I heard. $1 trillion, and so Sword Dragon gets paid off and goes away. Oddly enough, last year, you could see Lady Scarlet and Sword Dragon hanging around a lot, and they were talking, and then they'd get quiet, and they were talking, and then they'd get quiet. So who knows what they were planning, because this happened right after Eve Vegas. So the DRF finally then is able to go back down to the south, concentrate on Triumvirate. Triumvirate is dependent on FCs. If the FCs go AFK, chances are the rest of the guys aren't going to have leadership they need to fight, and they end up going quiet. So Triumvirate loses its keep star, and that pretty much signals the end of Triumvirate for a while. But at this point, mercenaries have been hired, called Skill U, to pacify the center, because Hard Knocks, which is a wormhole group, has been kind of just rampaging all throughout this time. So they can't deal with all three fronts at the same time, so they hire Skill U and Volta to come up there and kind of police the area and take care of it. And so what happens is the reason that GOTG attacked is because a diplomat named Jay had promised them that Test could move up north to attack GOTG in exchange for some protection in this war. But in doing so, angered GOTG, so the retaliation was to strike back, and that's why that actually happened. So with that kind of mishap, XIX fires their diplomat. The diplomat goes away. He doesn't make any arrangements to pay the mercenaries, and the mercenaries, who are probably seeing a target-rich environment, don't want to get paid anyway, because it'll allow them to now flip and start attacking. So you have the DRF now fighting three fronts. They've actually won two fronts, but the third one is getting too strong. There's indications that it's supported by other groups, including possibly Northern Coalition and those kinds of people. So with that kind of support, there's a demoralization, because the leader of DCU is actually friends with NC, and he's feeling this contradiction, so he says, we're done. And that's the end of the DRF. They collapse, they fall back into Innsmother, and they get caught trying to move onto Legacy's couch, where they might take a break, and you see a bunch of super carriers that are destroyed with all their stuff in it. because they were actually just moving. They weren't expecting to be ambushed. So Judgment Day is actually a part of this, and this is why this is so long and so intricate. But what had happened is Test had moved north to fight JOTG earlier on, and they had made kind of a deal that they would defend DRF if there was this war with Triumvirate, and there it was. So these arrangements were made, but CO2, which was partnered with Test, said, well, we want to get into this war, we want to get in with Tri, because there's a lot of good pickings if we fight with Tri, and in doing so, they ended up violating the terms of their contract. So Test said, even though we're in the same legacy coalition, if you attack them, you're kicked out of our coalition and you will become our target. And GigX said, fine. And so the judge who was at CSM at the time was already upset with GigX kind of always pushing aside the diplomats to fight wars, decides he's had enough and he's going to get his revenge. And this is what we call Judgment Day, because it is the judge. So he plans a heist, and he carries it out on September 11th, which is a terrible day for America. So I guess it was apt. And it's one of the biggest heists in history. He ends up taking all the SRP, which is Ship Replacement Program money, which he won't say how much it is, but it's quite a bit. He also took the one of the Titans that GigX used to use, but it was kind of a Corp Titan. And worst of all, because he had talked to Aerith at CSM, he takes the Keepstar that was in 68 FT, and he flips it and hands it over to Goonswarm, their mortal enemy. And then the judge is doing this by himself, a little bit of help from Aerith, and I think it was Jay Amazing that says, hey, it would be really funny if you broadcast your Alliance chat. And so he does. He broadcasts it live on Twitch, and some unfortunate things are said. CCP sees that and has to come down and ban CO2's leader, GigX, which really disassembles the whole structure that alliance was based on. And it is a mortal blow like we've never seen before. So they lose their leader to the game, and they lose all their money and all their corporations. And it was a master stroke of destruction, and it literally brought the end to the whole Southern fight, because CO2 was entering on Triumvirate side. That's two great powers, but they'd also hired mercenary coalition who were actually on their way when that happened. So they have to stop and turn around and go home. So all that momentum is completely killed with one heist. And funny enough, we were live right after that happened, and we had GigX, and we had the judge. We had them all on, and it was on that show that you see the clip. GigX says, oh, I think I've just been banned. And so he was banned live on TV, which is great for us, not so great for him. So later on, a little bit later in the timeline, you see the sack of Providence, because at this point there is a station change that's happening, and you have 97 stations in Providence. This whole time they've been building up Providence for years and years and years. There's a ton of stations there. Those are going to be allowed to be picked up and sold, and that is a fortune. So 97 station, everybody's eyeballing that. PL moves in first in May. They take it over. They fight pretty hard, but they actually take it over. I think the only guy defending, or the guy defending the hardest was this guy named Lumio, if you've heard of him. And he's just this guy that would keep fighting you. He's like an ankle biter. He'd just keep fighting you and fighting you and fighting you. You have to shake him off. Yeah, he's great. And then the second wave, which was kind of funny, because PL was only working with dreadnoughts, they didn't have their super capital fleet. That was safely in the north where it had to be to form that umbrella that protects the north. So all they had were dreads, and they used that to great effect to take over Providence, but they could not defend from a super capital fleet that came from Test. That was the second wave. Test saw the money too. They came in. They knew that PL was fighting with one arm behind their back, so they took over in rapid succession Providence, and they ended up with all of it. So it gets taken away from PL at that time. And that sets up the Great War of Titans. And so to begin the Northern Front, you're going back a few months here, right? Because I told you these are all interwoven. There's a Hakonnen deployment. And what happened is when Test went up north, I described that earlier, they were going to get some activity. Goon saw that as an opportunity. If Test is going up there to fight them, we'll go up there and fight them too. there'll be two groups fighting against them, and this is good for Goonswarm and the Imperium because a member of the Imperium had been under assault by one of the Northern powers. Northern Coalition had gone to Syndicate and taken over all their money moons and their space temporarily before this switch happened. This is also before, it's like 2 or 3 months before the changeover. And so Imperium goes north. Test doesn't have a good time of it. They end up coming down. Same with Imperium. They end up losing all their dreads to a bait that Killer B had formed on his, it was one of his really spectacular ships. They jump on it. He calls everybody in, and they wipe everybody out. But it served a purpose because NC had to come back to the north and leave Syndicate. So Syndicate is retaken over by Initiative. And so that's when something very interesting happens that I don't think people appreciated it at the time. I was in actually an INN meeting. We were talking about stuff, and Matani says, "Oh, I just got an offer to buy Fountain." I thought, well, you don't see that every day. And it was. The culture that had lived in Fountain and kind of pacified it said, we've had enough of this. We need to, like Triumvirate, go fight things, so we're going to leave. It's for our interest. It's our survival. So they sell it all to the people who would probably want it the most. And at this point, Imperium has grown very, very rich through a lot of mining and lack of war. And so they have the budget to do this, and they buy the structures in Fountain, and Initiative immediately comes in and takes all the Sov. So they now form, which is very, very disastrous for the North, a path from Delve straight up into Pureblind and Fade. So they have a direct link to the North that they can travel on, and they can actually get there in, I believe it's 18 minutes with some jump fatigue. But imagine you can use your super capital ships to travel in less than a half hour to your enemy's skirmishing border area. That is a devastating link. So that's exactly what happens, well, not the super capital fleets, but they start immediately doing missions. They were already skirmishing in the area, kind of harassing Horde, which lived in, I think it was Pureblind and Fade at the time. And so those things, GOTG is helping them, and they decide they're going to fight these SIGs a little harder, and it just starts ratcheting up. It's always for fun, right? Like all these fights start as things to do because it's fun, and then an opportunity strikes, and that's when you see all the heavy artillery come in to try to break something open. And that's exactly what happens here. So Horde, in order to defend, they decide they're going to put down a Keep Star as a forward operating base that their supers can hot drop from, and that is a 9-TAC-4. The 9-TAC-4, that ends up setting up a battle over that Keep Star because Goons decide, now with this super highway, we're going to take our super capital fleet and we're going to challenge that Fortizar. It's far out from the north. We can take this one. So they go up and they try to take it, and that is the biggest battle that Eve has ever seen. I actually streamed that one live, and we had 12,000 people watching live for like 8 hours. And it was a spectacular fight in slow motion. But yeah, it was spectacular. It's spectacular up here. But the Imperium cannot destroy it. Oh, and by the way, this was kind of funny. The reason 12,000 people were watching, and the reason this one gets a lot of publicity is it was the biggest one, but also ProGod Legend, who's an FC for Test, decides that this is possibly the biggest battle that can ever take place. So he writes a Reddit post, and he knows how to work it. He calls it the $1 million battle, and it gets snatched up. This is how I figured out how Reddit works. It depends on how much activity an article gets in the first few hours of its life cycle. That will depend on how long it gets put up at the top and seen. And I didn't know that at the time. So he did a great job of getting that publicity. That article shoots to the very top and stays there a long time. He gets asked by Canadian national television to talk on his screen. And so he's there talking about this huge battle that's going to happen. And it does happen, but the destruction isn't there. So a lot of people say it was the $1 million war that wasn't, or the $1 million battle that wasn't, but it had the potential to be. It's just that the Imperium figured out they could not win, so they withdrew. And not just from the battle, but from the field entirely. They moved all the way back down because now they could with the Fountain Corridor. And I wanted to point out at this point, I think a lot of people know this, but I thought I would point it out for people that don't. It seems like January is a blessed or cursed month, depending on how you look at it, because the biggest battles in EVE have all happened in January. With the exception of MTAC-0, which actually happened in December 2016, so it was about a month early. But if you look at those dates and the corresponding numbers, you'll realize that January is probably the high point of EVE Online. So now we're coming into the southern front, and this is where Winter and Triumvirate and now the Holy League, I've talked about Skill U and those mercenaries that flipped. They were from wormhole space, so they became this thing called the Holy League. And they end up joining with them, and they decide they're all going to march on Legacy. And when a lot of these battles start to happen, PL says, well, we couldn't do much without our super capitals, and we're tired of kind of sitting here. Let's go down and do this turkey shoot on Test, because Test can't really resist all of us. This is just going to be fun. So the super capitals from PL head south. And this is significant because you're taking a lot of firepower away from the north. So the Imperium sees that and says, Test, like a wrestling buddy, let's tag team. They join forces, and immediately, a few days later, Imperium scrambles their super capital fleet north because the north is substantially weaker. And that is... Right, so as soon as the Goon Swarm arrives, they put down a Keep Star, and that was the first big fight. And they put that down in 6RC. And the North cannot prevent that from happening. The thing about that Keep Star, it was within jumping range of 2 forward operating Keep Stars of the North. So that means if a Titan was lingering or got bumped off its staging, it could actually be jumped and attacked. And that's a problem because if you're the guy that gets bumped, right, Brisk? Oh, I'm just kidding. And you drift away, you've got to have the brass to say, I'm getting killed, guys, come bail me out. And all your guys have to form up to bail you out. So it's a big ask. So you don't want to be that guy. So it makes people a lot more cautious. But what's happened here, too, at this same time is that the Phoebe jump changes that were nerfed, that slowed everybody down, get lifted quite a bit. And that was a big event because the next stuff you start seeing is a lot of travel that you wouldn't have seen before with these super capital ships. They start to get a lot more daring and do things you would not have expected before. So in the south, after Imperial Legacy forms, you have this gigantic battle in UL. I call it UALX, UALX. And this is a huge showdown. I believe it wasn't Test that anchored this Keep Star, but it was part of their alliance or their legacy. And so they're putting down, I believe, is a forward operating base. It's challenged by PL. Both sides say they're going to attack it. They both say they're putting everything on the table. So there's a lot of talk. And what happens is both sides show up. And this becomes a gigantic battle. Again, we're broadcasting it live. We have thousands of people watching. It's marching towards downtime. Doomsdays are exchanging. Winter leader in FC Noros, who's here actually at Vegas, he gets destroyed. It's a big fight, and the potential for damage is getting bigger and bigger because more people are showing up. And actually, Goon Swarm decides they're going to, or Imperium, march, because they're actually active up in their super capital fleet is active in the north, decides they're going to come all the way down for this fight, which was unheard of. But remember, the jump restrictions have been let up quite a bit. And this is a very slow fight, and it looks like everybody actually engaged, so it's worth going down there for. And the NC in the north says, actually, I believe Headliner and Travis Muskrat were yelling at each other because Travis was saying, goons are moving, the Imperium's moving. And I think Headliner was saying, that's impossible. Don't get all worked up about it. Even on live stream, I was saying, that's impossible. It'll never happen. And then in about 45 minutes, everybody kept saying, yeah, they're all logging in. And I said, when they jump, their first jump, then tell me. Because that means you're committed. And that's when I said, okay, I guess they are coming down. So Imperium's moving down to this huge fight. NC's moving down to this huge fight. They almost enter the theater, except that these ships start to harass them and get them stuck so they can't actually enter the battle before, I think the server crashes, but basically downtime. So it was a nice try, but this battle started so late in the day for Americans that they didn't make it to the battle in time. But PL does destroy the Keep Star, but they get stuck. They're not able to move out, and they don't log in to try to move out right after the fight happens. So PL is actually stuck there for days, which is a big, big deal. Good guys win. And so that is the battle, and that actually turns the tide for the southern front of these titanic battles. That is when, I believe, Test realizes they can do this. They can actually hold these guys off, especially with some backup from the Imperium. And the funny thing is, although that Keep Star was destroyed, Pro-God Legend puts down another one 2 days later, right on top of them. So it was a very... 12 hours later. Not 2 days, 12 hours later. So it was a big sign that all your work for nothing, we actually got you trapped. That was an amazing fight. I think that's one of the most historic fights that you'll see in EVE Online. And so now comes the end game of this war. And you see that the Imperium now, with PL stuck in the south, and NC now with CO2 and GOTG trying to defend the north with Horde. Some of a commitment from Horde, but not a substantial one according to some people. That right after that, PL does manage to get free. And a couple days after they get free, the Imperium starts destroying low-sec friendly northern Keep Star. So they destroy Waffles Keep Star in Kanaka. They destroy Shadow Cartel in Aschi. These are in Black Rise. The Alliance tournament hits. The NC team and other people are doing really well in the tournament. So when Alliance tournament happens, a lot of these guys kind of lose focus. And that allowed the Imperium to focus on, surprisingly, a Keep Star called X-47, which is the staging ground for NC Dot. So it was a very bold move. And the reason they could do it is because SOV had been switched, had been handed over to NC, which means that the defenses were low. It was a good time to strike, and they did. It was a bold move, and they reinforced it, and they started to... the second timer, the armor timer, was a huge fight where they were slugging it back and they were slugging it out back and forth, and we had a ton of Titans get destroyed in that fight. And then the final timer was another huge fight, and that one I was actually in a Titan defending the Keep Star and getting shot at by Boat, who's right here. I won't lock eyes with him, but there he is. As I'm trying to broadcast for Imperium Network, and ends up that because of a lot of things, I think one of the major things was that the Imperium had done this new thing by double tanking their Titans, shield and armor, and were able to bring enough force auxiliaries to keep both the shield and the armor defenses high on each of their ships. And that allowed them to sustain a lot more damage than North was able to project, which meant that the volleys wouldn't work on Imperium, but Imperium was knocking out one after another Northern Titans. And I survived, but wounded. And so that Keep Star goes down and really signals the end of the Northern Front, because after that, the Imperium really goes to work on the north, and they wipe out DW, which had a brief stay because of a Sino jamming hiccup, which is cool because they're doing the new Sino jammers. Those look great, by the way. But at the time, it prevented a strike on one of the Keep Stars, which was kind of remarkable. It was interesting, but it was a delaying tactic. Eventually, the Imperium was able to take it down along with 7X, DO6, 3V. In one day, they took out 4 or 5 Keep Stars. And debatable. And on September 20th, 2018, there's a bit of an armistice, is that the right word? There's a deal that struck. And again, it was talk at one of the summits for CSM between Sword Dragon and Aerith, who put this deal together that would give, what's the next slide? Yeah, would give, the ceasefire would give Guardians of the Galaxy time to recover, give them 6 months, and actually give the entire North, all the allies, 1 month to kind of have a breather. It's kind of like a timeout to recover. And I think that Sword, from his perspective, is saying, I'm doing you a favor. I'm taking all the humiliation and I'm the one paying all these fortizars, these faction fortizars that were really expensive, to the Imperium to stall them while you guys mine your butts off to build and build so we can keep up with the Imperium. And so from his perspective, he had done a good thing. And I think NC agreed with him, but Horde did not. Horde saw that as terrible because Horde, at this point, I forgot to mention, had moved away from the theater. They moved away right after 9 TAC 4 happened. They realized that was going to be a hot zone, so they took off. And they left their 9 TAC 4 Keepstar behind. Or actually, the goons kept trapping it so it couldn't escape. Eventually, they got it out, though. And they moved over to Geminate, where they were actually at peace mining and trying to build a manufacturing base that would allow them to compete with these other powers. And when GOTG, that was kind of an interesting masterstroke because when Horde left, all that aggression came towards Guardians of the Galaxy. So Horde had been kind of like being the punching bag, took off, and that allowed all that aggression to come north. So GOTG wasn't that happy about that. CO2 moved in to kind of fill the vacuum, but that didn't last very long. But now Horde sees that GOTG struck a peace treaty, and all that aggression might swing towards Geminate and start to disrupt the industry that they're trying to build. So this is a very bad move for Horde, even though Horde is considered part of the North and will be protected for 1 month. That's peanuts in comparison. That really is enough time for the Imperium to go back down, take a breather, and come back up the other side and attack their territory. So they don't like this deal. They decide with Black Legion they're going to take on, they're going to make them pay. So they went and attacked the renters of Guardians of the Galaxies to show how much they do not appreciate that. And Northern Coalition says, and they reset Horde. And so now you have what is the Schism of the North. And this is still going on. This is what's happening in EVE Online right now. I drove up here with my friend Dunk, who's a great driver, and also Gobbins, and we were talking about this on the way up. So this is actually what's happening right now. So for me, I wanted to say that there was these Keepstars that I was nursing I called them Sanctuary Keepstars, and they were actually Keepstars from NETC, which was an enemy of the Imperium. And those I managed to save diplomatically by talking to the Imperium and asking them for permission to move them instead of having them destroyed, which I was able to do. So we had a couple of Keepstars. Actually, we had one got stolen. And then I bought a second one, and just recently, on air, as we were talking, Tess said, we're attacking Horde's money, $500 billion a month, by the way, their money section of HiSec. We want to take that market over. And Horde's busy right now fighting, so it's going to be hard for them to protect it. And I didn't know they were going to do this, so I sold them the Keepstars. And they actually, I did great. But they were, so Tess is the first one to drop a Keepstar in HiSec, and that just happened last week. So there you go. That's up to date now from the, 2016 to now, in case you missed that. And I want to go back to the beginning. Remember, we're talking about fleet commanders and campaigns and battles and singular events that shape EVE Online's nullsec wars. And you can identify there some of the stuff that happens in the last 3 years. You can see how it's gone. And you can see the funding model and how it helps empire builders these days a lot more than it helps the mercenary renter model. So you can see the people who are involved in those kinds of things. And that's a worrisome sign for people that don't want to change. So really the writing's on the wall, and some people know that. That's one of the big things that's happening in the North right now is a discussion and disagreement between Horde and DRF guys and NC and PL and the other guys. So DRF is saying we need to build empires like the Imperium's doing, and NC is saying, no, we'll just mine every once in a while to keep up. And that huge disagreement has led to what you see now, the schism. And the last thing I'll leave you with is that the DRF, or bot manager named Pfaffer, has decided that the North won't listen to him anymore. He's been with them for many years. He stabilized bot and managed all that, and he has decided that he is moving to Test Alliance. So I want to say thank you very much. To all the guys that helped me out technically, Brisk, Skeptic, Valentine, researchers, Noisy Gamer, watch Talking in Stations for these kinds of stories and more. We're on every Sunday. And I want to thank Talking in Stations crew. It's a huge group effort. And all the guests that we've ever had and interviews and stuff like that. Thank you very much. And we're going to have Talking in Stations in Las Vegas, 9 a.m. tomorrow, right here outside these doors. Thank you.